Okay, so today was Parshat Chaye Sarah, the lives of Sarah. Now, in the first, I'm trying to ad lib here, so I don't have any text in front of me. So it says in the first couple of verses, the years of Sarah were 100 years, 20 years, and 7 years. So that's very weird. Why didn't it just say she was 127 years old? Her life was 127 years old, because what it says is there were different phases of her life, and the one, even when she was 99 and she was told that she was going to have a child, she still had the beauty of a person in her 20s, and that's one of the reasons. But it's because it gives different phases of her life have different meanings. So I don't know how to add to that. But as in the Torah, in the Torah, there's no superfluous words. Every word has meaning. Even like when they mention the offerings of all the tribes in the desert, all the tribes, and it repeats it 12 times. So why don't it just say they all gave these things? Because there's nothing superfluous. Everything has meaning, and that's the way we look at it. I know for our limited minds, why don't they just cut to the chase? But like in Gemara, the same thing in Gemara. They go around and around in circles. They go off on a tangent and then go back to the main point. But so maybe it's just to teach us to be patient. I think maybe that could be one of the lessons. I don't know. And not instant gratification.
Good. So your point with Sarah is it wasn't 127. It wasn't repeating the same year 127 times. Each day for her was significant. Each day was a day of growth. Everything was significant. It wasn't just about years that passed. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, 100 years and 27 years and 20 years and 5 years. That's the way it is, not 127 years.
Yeah.
It means different phases of significance.
Yeah. Very, very good. Very good. No, it's important to know that you haven't done the same thing 127 times, but every time is different. And that's how your learning should be, is that it's not a repeat of the learning you've done before. It should be a completely different learning. And every year, Pasha should be a completely different Pasha based on your life experience and what you understand with regards to the level of depth. All right, guys, I'm going to start the Gemara share. Arthur, are you there? Even if you're on mute, are you there?
I'm walking around, Damon. I just wanted to talk.
Yeah, my kid was in the thing she was in a bra, so I switched off the
no, that's
camera.
Good. No, that's a good idea.
Okay. By the way, I've been thinking for 125 years. What I take on it is, most, like you say, it's made it to 120.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's the thing of breaking it up. Emphasize that, it's more than the regular.
That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. Okay.
Like a gift.
That's true. That's absolutely true. Okay. We're gonna get started now. Now, the note that we left on is in the Mishnah. It said that whitening is obviously seen as a significant change. Okay. Now he's saying that we don't seem to agree because we found something in a different source. Why? Because if you have a look in Chulin, in Gemara Chulin, in the 135th Daf and Aleph, the Torah is setting up the scene, and it says, look, there's a commandment that every year that when one shears his sheep, he must give the first of the shearings to a Kohen. And where's that from? It's in Devarim, in Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 4. But the thing of it is here that the Torah doesn't specify an amount that must be given. It just requires that you give that first shearing to a Kohen, and it's got to be of some significance. If you look at the commentaries by the Meforshim, they generally say it should be at least 1/60th of the total yield. Enough significance that at least that it stands out. Okay. Now the thing of it is, when you look at that dove, it says, look, it's different in that brisa when it discusses that daf in Chulin compared to the one that it discusses in Bava Kamma in the 93rd daf. Because the Mishnah basically says in Bava Kamma that whitening is considered a significant change, and therefore, if you steal wool and you decide to bleach it, then it means that that wool is enough of a process, even if you haven't turned it into a garment yet, for the thief to keep the wool and for him to return the cash equivalent to the original owner or the haberdashery shop. But in this particular daf in Kulin 135a, it's contrasting that, because the contradiction is as follows. If you look at the first shearings, the owner of the wool, say he didn't manage to give the first of the shearing to the Kohen before he died, and say it slipped his mind, he's exempt. Now, why is he exempt? Because he's no longer required to give the first of the shearings, and he keeps it for himself for one particular reason. And that reason is, if the owner, after separating the first of the shearings for the Kohen, does it, it's now undergone a physical change. And it's no longer considered the same wool that was separated as the first of the shearings. In other words, it can't be taken into the equation. So that actually the owners acquired it. And it's no longer under the obligation to give to the Kohen. Now, guys, it contrasts a little bit to the case of our Mishnah, because a robber has to give that money back to the person he stole if he gets to acquire the stolen article, because it has a significant physical change. Now, in this case, the person doesn't have to make a monetary compensation to the Kohanim for taking the shearings. Why? Because it's not considered a true act of robbery in the human course. Why? Because there's no specific Kohen that can come up and have a case against him. We learned this similarly if money was entrusted to a person to distribute to the poor. But there are no specific stipends given, or no specific amounts of, apart from no stipends for the amounts. If no specificity was given regarding which charity it must go to, as soon as the owner's given it to this watchman or this custodian, it's out of his hands. If he says, well, the custodian lost it, he gave it to the custodian to distribute to tzedakah. So it's no longer the owner's, but he can claim back in court from the custodian. Now, the poor can't have a claim against the custodian for losing it or having liability for it to be stolen, because no specific poor person can bring a case. Because the custodian can say, no, it wasn't intended for this person or for that poor person. So there's no plaintiff that can bring forward a case against the defendant. You've got the same thing here with the Kohen, is that no specific Kohen can come up to the farmer with the first of the shearings and say that belongs to me. He can always say, listen, it belongs to another Kohen. It wasn't intended for you. So therefore, in the human court, there's no plaintiff and no defendant. In the case of the robber, took it from an actual person, and that person actually can have a claim against him in court. So you do have a plaintiff and a defendant in that case. But just because the first of the shearings has no accountability in the human court, doesn't mean Shemaim will not hold that person responsible for having deprived the Kohen of it. The question is, was it a case of intentional dying in order that it has a physical change and the Kohen doesn't get it? Or is it a case where it slipped his mind and only Shemaim knows? But the reason we bring in this case in Kulin is we're saying this differs from our Mishnah, because in Kulin, it's saying that dying is a significant change, and inferring from that, it means, yes, dyeing it is a significant change, but not whitening it. If he only whitened it, he's obligated to give the first of the shearings to the Kohen. So evidently then, if you contrast that with our Mishnah, whitening is not considered enough of a change that affects acquisition. That's what it's saying. It seems to contradict our Mishnah. Does that all make sense so far, guys, before I build the next step?
Yeah.
Kev?
Whitening, so you're talking about whitening.
Yeah.
Whitening.
Whitening as
if it's for cleaning, as in not in If it's, that's the point. So when they were whitening for cleaning,
Kevin asked
not
a
a
good
change.
question. He's saying, what do we mean by this definition of whitening? If the wool itself that the robber sheared from the ewe was filthy dirty, and by cleaning it, it now looks white in comparison, that's just removing grime. So that's not significant enough to create a physical change. Maybe that is the whitening we're talking about in our particular case. So the problem is with that answer is that in the Mishnah, it talks about that sort of whitening as being a significant change. In the Brisa, it doesn't. But what it's saying is the dyeing is. So either way, according to either opinion, there's what you call a whitening or cleaning process that's involved with just cleaning it, and there's one with combing. So combing is, to answer Kevin's question, a significant change, because that cleaning actually changes the physical properties of the wool itself in terms of softness, debris removed, etc., and the structure. Whereas just getting rid of it is merely cleaning, and it doesn't change the physical structure of the wool. So for the purposes of this case, we're saying is that the Mishnah is saying that whitening is a significant change to effect acquisition for a robber. But when you don't give the first of the shearings to the Kohen, it's because you've dyed it and not because of whitening. So evidently, whitening is not enough of a physical significant change for the farmer to keep that first shearing. So it must go to the Kohen. So we're going to resolve the contradiction as follows. And basically, how it works is as follows. As a buyer said, it's actually not a contradiction. If you look at the Brisa regarding robbery, it states that whitening constitutes a change. That follows Rabbi Shimon. If you look at the Mishnah regarding Chulin 135a, regarding the first shearings, whitening does not constitute a change. That follows the opinions of the Rabbonim. So he's saying there's actually no contradiction at all. The Bava Kamma follows Rabbi Shimon, and basically the first shearings follows the rabbis regarding the Kohen. So where we find that Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis actually dispute this matter is we learn it in a slightly different part of the Brisa concerning the first of the shearings. So it says, if the farmer or if the owner of the ewe or the lamb or whatever sheared the wool and then spun it or wove it, it does not combine with any successive wool that he shears. So what does it mean? Well, I'm going to explain to you what how this actually works. Guys, I'm having a background on the phone. So Gavin, I only think it could be you because you're not muted. I'm going to just cut your mute. I'm just going to mute you.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay. So what we're saying is as follows. Is if you look at the term ariga, which is weaving, it's a general term and it refers to the weaving together of spun threads. But if you look at the broader sense, it encompasses other methods of interlocking as well. So in other words, it could refer to the knitting, braiding, weaving, different methods of bringing together unspun woolen fibers, right? And that we're talking about a case here, according to Tosfot, where it didn't undergo the physical change of spinning or prior to weaving. Because the minute you spin it, that's considered a significant change, but not weaving, because you have to spin the wool once it's sheared. By the time you weave it, that's a different case. Okay. So if you have a look back in Chulin, you're not obligated to give the first of the shearings to the Kohen unless you shear 5 lambs or 5 ewes, and those shearings each weigh 1.5 manna. So in other words, it has to be part of a total, so that if the owner sheared and spun or braided the wool of each ewe individually before proceeding to shear the next ewe, okay, the shearings don't combine with another to complete the requisite amount. because the earlier shearings underwent a physical change before the accumulation of the requisite amount. And that's considered no longer extant at the time that the fifth ewe was shorn. So what we are saying here, according to Rashi, is that they need to weigh 1.5 manna each, and you have to combine them. And then when you combine them, you do the processing as one unit, and that's considered the first of your shearings. If that isn't done, and you do any sort of physical property change to the wool on an individual basis before those 5 ewes accumulate, that can't be constructed as part of the total process. Okay. So what happens as far as that's concerned is it was taught in a brisa that if you sheared the wool and then spun or wove it, because you made a physical change, it doesn't combine with any successive wool that you shear. Okay? So that means that it can't be counted as part of the full shearings. And then it affects overall, if you've got enough weight of 1.5 manna times 5, to be able to have 7.5 manna in total of unphysically changed wool in order to give to the Kohen. Otherwise, it messes up the whole equation. So it's not a contradiction, okay? Because that's according to Rabbi Shimon's opinion that if he only whitened it, then it's basically not able to combine at all. In other words, it's enough of a physical change that you can't add that to the total, and it messes up the entire requisite total amount. But the Rabbonim say something different. It does combine, because what's actually happening there is whitening isn't constituting enough of a physical change that affects acquisition. So that's where the opinion comes from. Now, I want you to just give it over to me before I give you a contradicting opinion. Okay, Arthur, give it over to me.
Okay, so what they're saying is you got to have, and the total amount you got to have is 5 shearings of, I think it's 1 point something, as you mentioned there. But the problem is when you have the whitening, it messes up the whole thing. That's what I got from it.
Excellent. So Arthur understood the gist of it, that each ewe's shearings have to total at least 1.5 manna. When you put it aside, you need 5 of them at 7.5 manna to constitute the shearings. You can give more, but you need at least 7.5 manna and at least from 5 ewes. If you want to give more, you can. But the minute there's a physical change where your individual wool is tampered with, it now can't be part of the total, and it affects the overall equation of the prerequisite amount. So then you need the first shearings of the other animals to make up the 7.5 manna, but of at least 5 ewes. So Rabbi Shimon says that whitening itself is not a significant enough. Rabbi Shimon says whitening is significant enough of a change, and it basically doesn't combine, because that will throw the amount out. It's too significant. The sages say it does combine because that physical change of whitening is not significant enough, so it can be added to the total. Gav, just give over the concept. You're on mute.
No, I'm not feeling great. I just skipped me today. Seriously, I can hear you, but I don't think I can give anything over really. I'm not clear.
Yeah, it's okay. Just try.
When I tell you I can't, it means I can't. Trust me. I'm so dazed. I'm really battling. I'm hearing. I heard what Arthur said. I heard what you said.
All right.
I've got an idea, but that's it. I'll have to refresh it. I'm not feeling great. Sorry. Ask Kevin to give it a shot.
Kevin, give it a shot.
Okay, I'll try give it a bash. Okay, so there has to be 7 or it's also 5, a minimum of 5 shearings with a total weight of how many money? I've forgotten the measurement. But anyway, they have to be all there together. And if there's 3 of those, there has to be 5 in total. If 2 or 1 out of the 5 has been whitened, they have to be all the same. They have to be uniform. Otherwise, it's not going to be not acceptable. It's not going to be. It's not counted. It has to be all 5, and they all have to be the same. They can't. Some can't be whitened and others not. They all have to be unwhitened. At least 5 out of at least 5 to be given to be. Is it redeemed for the Kohen? Like
according
for
to
the
what?
mighty Kohen?
According to what opinion?
I don't know. Rav,
All right.
I don't know.
So, guys, let me just give you
Rashi, I don't know.
the following bullet points. I'm going to give it to you in simple. This is how to learn Gemara, right? The first thing, the Mishnah in Bava Kamma in the 92nd daf is discussing the fact that whitening or bleaching constitutes a significant enough change that the robber gets to keep the wool even if he hasn't spun it into a garment yet, and he gives the cash equivalent to the owner of the wool. That's step number 1. Step number 2 is we look in Chulin 135a and notice that the shearings that a farmer must give to a Kohen, the first of the shearings, there must be a minimum of 5 ewes, lambs, whatever you call it, and 1.5 manna each. That sort of 7.5 manna from 5 ewes must be given as first shearings to the Kohen. Now, if the farmer forgot and dyed the wool or part of the wool, he doesn't then give it to the Kohen. He gets to keep it. That's point number 2. So by saying that dyeing is a significant change, it means that bleaching or whitening by comparison is not enough of a significant change, and that seems to contradict our Mishnah. So we're saying, how can we have a Mishnah and a Brisa that contradicts each other, where on the one hand it says that whitening or bleaching constitutes a significant change, and on the other it says it does not. So Abaya says there's no problem. Our Mishnah in Bava Kamma is Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Shimon holds that bleaching or whitening, whether it's to clean it or whether it's to actually put sulfur in boiling water, is enough of a change where it constitutes a physical change to the degree that the thief can keep the item, but he has to give the cash equivalent. If he's speaking on the Gemara in Chulin 135a, he would also say that bleaching or whitening is the same as dyeing, and it's significant enough of a change that if that happened to part of the shearings, the Kohen doesn't get it because the prerequisite accumulation does not reach its total because you've messed up the total process. So we're saying, Abaya is saying that the rabbis hold differently. They're actually the ones that have done that are involved with the opinion with the first shearings of the Kohen, and they hold that whitening or cleaning to the degree in white or bleaching it isn't significant of a change, and therefore if the farmer originally messed up and bleached some of it and not the other, it's not considered a physical change. They can combine to have a total weight of 5 ewes of 7.5 manna, and those first and that first shearing goes to the Kohen. However, if it was dyed, the rabbis say that's too much of a significant change, and therefore that does not go to the Kohen because it has to be untreated to go to the Kohen. That's all we're saying. So it's not a contradiction. That's all we're saying. Right, now let's go to the next part. There's an alternative resolution, and that's brought by Rava. You often have a buyer and you have Rava, okay? 2 greats. So Rava's saying that both this brisa regarding robbery in Bava Kamma and the Mishnah regarding the first of the shearings to the Kohen in Chulin basically reflect the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Okay. Now, And Rabbi Shimon always rules that whitening constitutes a physical significant change. Now, this is the interesting part. It's still not a contradiction. Why? The Mishnah regarding the first shearing states that whitening does not constitute a change, refers to where he disentangled the wool by hand and removed the dirt particles through that method. So as Kevin quite rightly said in the beginning, is that we're talking about two different processes of whitening. If the whitening is getting rid of the grim and the gram, and it's just white in comparison to the previous state, you haven't bleached it, so it's not a physical change. But the brisa we learn in Bava Kamma regarding robbery, where whitening does constitute a change, that's where you actually comb the wool to remove the dirt particles, which constitutes more of a change. So then we're not saying in Bava Kamma even that he bleached the wool, merely that the process is that when you're tearing at the wool to clean it like that, as opposed to a soft, gentle rub, you're changing the very fibers of the fabric to where it's considered that human interference a physical enough change. We're not talking about bleaching. Bleaching is obvious to Rabbi Shimon. We're talking here about how that exertion affects it in the case of the robbery of how it's cleaned compared to the first shearings of just gently washing it up. In other words, the combing of the fibers damages it or changes it, whereas washing it just cleans it. So even there is as far as a change. Now, there's even another resolution. Rav Chia bar Ravin says, this Mishnah regarding the first of the shearings for the Kohan states that whitening does not constitute a change, refers to where he merely washed the wool. Okay? But the brisa regarding robbery states that the whitening doesn't constitute a change. Why? Because he used, they call the word sulfurized in the Aramaic. But what it means is he basically used sulfur and boiling water to bleach it. So all we're saying there is, look, both the brisa stating the whitening affects acquisition and the Mishnah, which states it doesn't affect acquisition, both accord with Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis. There's no contradiction between both of them, because their dispute pertains to only whitening through the combing process. Does that physically alter the fibers? But both opinions agree, according to Rav Chia bar Avin, that when you washing, even though that doesn't affect acquisition, but the damaging of the fibers in terms of how vigorously you wash, that does affect acquisition as far as Rabbi Shimon is concerned. But both the rabbis and Rabbi Shimon agree that boiling in sulfur does affect actually acquisition. Why? Because there's enough of a physical change. And basically the brisa, as far as the robbery is concerned, is regarding when the thief boils it in sulfur in order to dye it. Now, Tosfot notes that Rava agrees with actually Rav Chia bar Avin. Rava actually does agree with that whitening with sulfur constitutes a change, even according to the rabbis. They don't disagree with that. But Rava doesn't give Rav Chia bar Avin's answer. Why? Because Rava holds that boiling in sulfur is like considered dyeing, white rather than whitening. Why? Because it has a permanent white tone. It's not the whitening where it was dirty wool and now it's clean. It's a dyeing process. So he doesn't constitute that it's anything different. And therefore, if dyeing constitutes an acquisition, the brisa can't be referring to whitening with sulfur. That's all it's saying as far as that's concerned. Now, there's a difficulty with Rabbi Shimon's position that whitening constitutes a change. Why? Because it can even be said, if you look at another brisa, that dyeing, which is a greater change in whitening, doesn't constitute a change by Rabbi Shimon. So we're saying, hang on a second, there's an issue. How can Rabbi Shimon be more strict than the rabbis, where he says whitening, bleaching? Well, let's not use the word bleaching, because there's two types of whitening. Bleaching is one, and cleaning is another, as Kevin wanted to suggest. But Rabbi Shimon is saying that it is significant enough of a physical change that both the farmer as well as the robber can effect acquisition through that method if it's combing and damaging the fibers, even by cleaning. And the rabbis say no. So how can it be that according to Rabbi Shimon, dyeing, which is much more of a shock to the fabric and changes it completely, doesn't affect acquisitional change because it's physically that significant, whereas the rabbis that are more lenient regarding the whitening process says that dyeing constitutes a physical change. That's the question of the Gemara. So we need to look into it because it was taught in a different brisa. If he sheared his sheep one by one and he dyed each one's wool as soon as it was shorn, we sheared them one by one and spun each one's wool as soon as it was shorn, or he sheared them one by one and wove each one's wool as soon as it was shorn, they do not combine. Why? Because each of those shearings underwent a physical change before the accumulation of the requisite amount. Okay? So since that's the case, he's saying Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Shimon. Now, Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda is quoting Rabbi Shimon. There's going to be different opinions of Rabbi Shimon. And he said if he only dyed the wool, they do combine, meaning dyeing is not a significant enough change. So it would seem that Rabbi Shimon maintains that even dyeing doesn't constitute a change. So how can he rule in the first brisa that whitening, which is okay by the rabbis, constitutes a change, whereas Rabbi Shimon is more strict and says that whitening doesn't, and yet dyeing, which the rabbi says is too severe, Rabbi Shimon is saying it's not that severe. So Abaya resolves the contradiction. He's saying, look, it's not a contradiction at all. The first brisa we're talking about that whitening and certainly dyeing constitutes a change. That reflects the rabbi's version of what Rabbi Shimon says. So you've got two versions. The rabbi's opinion of Rabbi Shimon, and then you've got Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda's opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Now, if you have a look at the rabbi's opinion, what it's saying is the second brisa regarding the first of the shearings that state that even dyeing, and obviously certainly whitening, doesn't constitute a change, reflects Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda's version of Rabbi Shimon's opinion. So what are we saying here in a nutshell? Is that both brises quote Rabbi Shimon, and the first brisa doesn't ascribe to the fact that Rabbi Shimon's view to a particular sage. It's a general rabbinic opinion. So that's where they differ. Now, if you want a slightly alternative resolution where Abaya is saying it's not a contradiction, they're both different opinions of Rabbi Shimon. Rav is saying, look, I'm going to tell you that the rabbis don't disagree with Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda. In fact, as far as how Rabbi Shimon ruled in this matter, all agree that according to Rabbi Shimon, if you whiten wool, it constitutes a change that is so significant it affects acquisition, whereas dyeing doesn't constitute a change that affects acquisition. Because they say, look, you've got to distinguish, because if you're dealing with a dye that is temporary, like most dyes were, they can be removed from detergent. So rabbis would even agree with Rabbi Shimon that that sort of dyeing process is not significant enough because it's a reversible change. And we know that a reversible change doesn't affect acquisition, according to the rabbi. Why? Because it allowed for the process of teshuvah. But when you bleach something, it's an irreversible change. And even the rabbis will agree with Rabbi Shimon as far as that's concerned. But when you're looking at this thing that was stated in the Mishnah about in Chulin 135a, the Kohen, the reason why it's exempt to give it to the Kohen is because when he dyed it, he used indigo, which is not removable with detergent. It's a permanent dyeing process. And that does constitute a physical change that is permanent, and therefore it affects acquisition. And then according to everybody's opinion, Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis, in that particular case, it means that the Kohen doesn't get the first shearings because it cannot accumulate with the requisite amount. So we've got to determine between what type of whitening. Is it bleaching? Is it not? Is it cleaning? to get off the dirt, or is it cleaning where you're damaging the fibers and still cleaning? Are you dealing with permanent white dyeing or temporary nature? So the bottom line is the opinions are the same. The primary principle is if the physical change is permanent, it does affect acquisition. If it's temporary or reversible, you haven't damaged the physical properties of the fibers, then there is no change to talk about. Any sort of process where it changes the color or whitens or bleaching, there is something to talk about, and then it's a physical change that affects acquisition. All right, so guys, that's the bottom line. I'm not going to get more complicated than that. I hope I explained it okay.
No, excellent. I was a bit out of it today, but I did hear you, Damon. Don't worry.
What I'm doing is I'm
And you
taking the Gemara and I'm making it in a more simplified version. I'm trying to work on how Rabbi Cohen does it. Authors are getting a bit better, but taking very complicated. Okay, cool.
David, it helps that I get, I listen to this stuff and I hear you, and like when he says things and you say things, it comes together.
Yeah, but I must tell you something. Rabbi Cohen is clear, and whenever mine comes across as too complicated, I'll go back to Rabbi Cohen and go back to the basics about how do you take a complicated concept, break it up into 4 or 5 steps, understand the principle, and give it over. So that's the genius of Rabbi Cohen, as well as his sense of humor, really. So I'm learning. I'm still learning every day when I teach. Guys, have a wonderful day. I'll see you at 12:30 tomorrow. Mate, I'm pleased you're feeling better. I'm so sorry you saw. Really, I am.